Hello, everybody. Good evening. Good morning. You are not in Asia. I am Chong Chen Yao, the advisor to the board of Carbon Care InnoLab, formerly the executive director, and also the co-founder of this organization. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to ASECC 2025. So this is a concluding session. I would like to take this opportunity to, first of all, welcome Dr. Ute Collier, the acting director of Knowledge Policy Finance Center of IRENA. IRENA, of course, is a major organization promoting the use of renewable energy. So we'll have a fireside chat on the present situation, the opportunity and challenges, and the future prospect of renewable energy, in particular solar energy. But before starting, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody, all the speakers, the audience, and also the colleagues, especially some of the young interns who have taken part in this event, in the preparation and in the running of this three-day seminar, which is now becoming an annual event on solar energy. And we are happy to contribute to the conversation worldwide on this very important topic. So today we'll run the session in this manner. I will raise a few questions, major topics for Ute to respond. And then after our conversation, we will welcome the audience to make any questions. So Ute, let me start by asking you to comment on the state of play of renewable energy take-up, especially solar, in Asia and in any other region as a whole. In Asia, we see that the take-up is, I think, increasing. The prospect is good. Are you, in general, happy with the progress or any aspects of the situation you particularly want to comment on?
All right, thank you for the question, and thanks for inviting me to take part in this fireside chat. So on renewables, I mean, we have seen amazing developments over the last few years. I mean, I'd say over the last decade in general, there's been such an increase in renewables capacity. We're seeing growth from year to year, but what's been particularly impressive is, I'd say, the last 2 years, sort of from 2022, where we've seen a massive increase in new solar PV globally. So at IRENA, we do renewable energy statistics. So every March, we bring out the latest statistics on renewable energy capacity. And the additions for 2024 were pretty impressive, 585 gigawatts globally. And of course, as you probably know, a lot of this has been solar. And this is, 10, 15 years on from when people were saying, oh, solar is far too expensive. It could never, really take off, etc. So that's been pretty impressive. And just looking at 2025, the sort of initial figures we're seeing coming out of China, for example, around 212 gigawatts of solar and 51 gigawatts of wind. So this trend seems to continue, which is great. But as ever, the picture is not totally perfect globally. So of those impressive additions globally, I mean, it's good for your region, for Asia. I mean, the vast majority of those additions have been in Asia for renewables in general, but also specifically solar. And I guess not surprisingly, I mean, China is also, of course, the largest country. So we would expect in an ideal world to see the largest additions in China. But from our perspective in IRENA, there is we are still a bit concerned that this renewables transition at the moment is dominated by very few countries. I mean, it used to be just Europe. Now it's mostly Asia, but in Asia it's mostly China and India, with a bit from some other countries like Thailand and Vietnam. But we also have many countries falling or just being left behind. And those are the countries where renewables could make such a big difference to people's livelihoods. I'm thinking, of course, first and foremost of African countries, especially sub-Saharan Africa, where we have a huge deficit in energy access globally. But there's also some countries in Asia where energy access is still an issue. Some of the islands. So those are some of the developments where a lot more needs to be done. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about money at some stage soon in this conversation. There are still many countries which struggle to access financing for renewables.
Yeah, in a way, it's an irony, isn't it? Because the cost of renewable energy has declined substantially over the years. And now that there has been talk about using renewable energy as a major source in development assistance, development work. So what prevent countries like in Africa or some of the islands in Asia or some of the remote parts in Asia from deploying renewable energy to address the issue of, say, access to energy? And we know the statistic is still quite daunting. 700 or 800 million people are still denied access to electricity. So what are the factors? Is your final statement, say, access to finance, or any other factors that we have to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, it's of course complicated as ever. I mean, I'd also just to add another figure. People always think about access to electricity, but the other side of the energy access problem is the lack of access to clean cooking. We still have 2.3 billion people cooking with firewood and charcoal globally, and that has a lot of implications for people's health, etc. And I mean, that those problems can be solved. Yeah, sure. Some countries have gone down the LPG route, for example, in Indonesia or India. But there are also renewables options, so something else to keep in mind. But finance is a big problem because when you're trying to build new renewables, can be extremely cheap in countries where it's easy to access cheap capital. So you have to have, a good financial rating as a country, and then you can access capital cheaply. But what we see in a number of developing countries is that access to capital is very expensive because, of course, financing institutions, they factor in risk, and they see risk, I mean, be it political risk because of instabilities, currency risk, of course, many currencies go up and down, and of course, a lot of certainly the equipment has to be paid for in hard currency, especially dollars. So what then happens, it pushes up the cost of the renewables. So, I mean, the long-term, the levelized cost of electricity, which is one way we're looking at the cost of renewables, that the high risk premium, some countries like Pakistan, for example, have to pay, really push up those levelized costs, and the financing, those high financing costs, they can make up, like 2/3 of the actual costs of electricity. So that's certainly one problem. So it's costly capital. I mean, there's even countries where it's almost impossible to get any access to foreign currency, especially when countries are already heavily indebted. And of course, we rely on the private sector to deliver renewables projects. And, there are countries which are just not attractive to them. If they have a potential big market in a country that's stable, that hasn't got currency risk, etc., that's where they would go. Whereas there's other countries where, I mean, the policy framework is also important. You have to have the stability. You have to have a policy framework which includes, say, the right incentives. It doesn't put huge tariff barriers onto the imports, for example, of equipment. So, I mean, I can see it from their perspective that they go, well, if country X has a very favorable environment, that's where you go. Country Y puts barriers in your way, that's not where you're going to go and invest.
In a way, there are two sides to the issue. Number one is the rising take-up of renewable energy in Asia. And at the same time, the coal-fired plant, the traditional fossil fuel-based energy sector is still, I would say, flourishing. So apart from those addressing those who have no access to energy, we have also to address those who are hooked up to fossil fuel-based energy supply, isn't it? From the point of view of climate mitigation and moving towards the Paris goal. So are you seeing any movement, optimistic or not, towards a greater effort in retiring coal-fired plants and in place of it, building more renewable energy? Is there a shifting occurring?
Okay, I mean, as I said to you, we have seen a very high increase of new renewables capacity, and that is far outstripping any fossil fueled capacity, new capacity. So that's a good sign. Very few countries are building new fossil fuel plants, especially coal plants. But there, as you are right in saying that, obviously we still have countries with a heavy existing power plant park of, coal and gas-fired plants. It's been slow progress retiring some of those. You also get sort of things like, people trying to retire them, and then there is a crisis and they get opened again, which is not helpful. I mean, we've certainly seen that in Europe in recent years when we've had some problems because of gas supplies. So people even opened coal-fired plants again. We know it's not going to happen from by tomorrow, right? So, for example, in Irina's scenarios, we have, of course, had to build in a transition time to get to the net zero by 2050. But what we do need is countries to certainly address any fossil fuel subsidies, which we are still seeing in many countries. But I think we also need to think about the end use sectors importantly, because why are we still using so many fossil fuels? Actually, it's not just in the power sector. It's also because we use a lot of fossil fuels in industry, which is a big problem. And those are what we call the hard to abate sectors. And of course, you can't sort of simply switch to renewable electricity in many of those sectors. It may have to be done through hydrogen, for example, green hydrogen, which you produce through renewables, which you then can use in those very energy intensive industries. It's a complicated picture, and I would say it's not going fast enough. That's for sure.
I don't know whether you have any an observation or a comment to share on the walk back. In a way, we witnessed some walk back on phasing out fire plant or even commitment to renewable energy. Some are geopolitical thing. Some are, the program like JETP is witnessing decrease in funding and so on. So these are difficult things, but I think what we as NGO or those who are committing to moving forward, what should we do in face of the apparent political walk back in commitment in a way, or do you see any positive sign there?
Okay, I mean, we are in a very difficult time at the moment, I would say. I mean, a few years ago, it just seemed inconceivable that we could end up at a time where, where we even have people questioning the value of renewables, considering what's happened in terms of the cost reductions. I mean, logically, you could possibly question whether we can get to net zero by 2050 and whether we can replace, say the use of fossil fuels in industry, like I discussed. But I wouldn't have expected there being so much of a pushback in some countries. Okay, so this is obviously problematic. But I mean, one thing also to remember is that for many environmental issues, I'm not just thinking climate change, other environmental issues, we've had these waves, where there were waves where we were right, top of the political agenda and everything seemed to be going well and we get international agreements. And then a few years later, it goes down again. So I'm still hopeful that this is a temporary blip, right? Because I mean, we are in a climate emergency, and you can deny as much as you like that it has a link to, carbon emissions. The majority of scientists will still confirm that this is the problem, and as a planet, as humanity, we will have to address it. That there is a pushback from some sides and it's political. We just have to hang on in there. I don't think we have an alternative. I have myself worked in NGOs before as well. It can be very frustrating. I think it can be very frustrating, especially for those NGOs who work in the countries where there is the biggest pushback. But I don't see an alternative. So we just have to continue using the rational arguments, even if they're not being listened to. And especially, I mean, we at IRENA will certainly continue highlighting all the benefits of renewables, in terms of the lower costs, in terms of what they can do for energy access and reducing dependency on imports. There's so many positive aspects. We will continue talking about jobs and hopefully, we still also, let's remember, we have many countries who are still absolutely adamant that they have to achieve the energy transition and net zero and go down this path.
Well, yeah, thank you for this encouraging message. I think you are absolutely right. We don't have other choices. We have only one planet. And what kind of planet we want to inherit to the next generation, or even within our generation.
Yes.
But we have to recognize the obstacles. And then I also very much share your view that, yeah, there are swings left and right. And it is in difficult time that testing our resolve. So, yeah, I think your message to invite people to stay on, to persevere, to work on what we believe to be right is absolutely a good message for this conference. But before we end, I would like to invite some of the audience to see if they have any questions for Uta, who is so experienced in this field, or any comment you want to make after hearing what we talk about. So if there are any questions or even just comment, then we can share. I know it's in Asia it's Friday evening, so maybe people are getting ready for a relaxing evening. But this is also a very important topic we are dealing with. And so, any question? If not, then we'll continue. So I will want you to also address this question, where policy-wise, do you have an example of good policy introduction in the past year? I recognize that UK somehow said they no longer have coal-fired plant at all. So are there any other encouraging policy that you are aware that are not being sort of well publicized and so on, or in the making?
I don't know, you're putting me on the spot there. I'm not sure I can. I mean, that, policy just continuously develops. because countries, kind of also have to experiment with how things are going. So don't know. I think on this one, bear with us so we haven't talked about the tripling target yet, have we? But we have the tripling target for renewables and doubling of energy efficiency, which IRENA does an annual tracking report for. So we're currently working on this. And one of the things we look at in this report is exactly, what are some of the recent policies that have been introduced, which will help us accelerate renewables deployment, which we need to do to achieve that tripling target. So this will be out just before COP30 in Brazil. So that can answer some of those questions. Yeah.
You help all of us to remember that governments made in front of world media and the public that they are committed to tripling renewable energy by 2030. Well, this is a very important commitment. We cannot just forget about it. We have to monitor and contribute as well to fulfilling it. So I'm glad you mentioned this and remind us. And the IRENA's tracking report is going to be very helpful. So I'm sure that we are still short of the target right now, but we have several years to catching
Well,
up.
not so many years. It's already 2025.
Yes, yes, yes.
I
would
mean,
like
the
to.
thing is with just on this tripling target, yeah, it was agreed at COP28 in Dubai a couple of years ago. And since then we've made quite a lot of progress, but our finding last year, and it will be exactly the same this year, is that we're still behind.
Yeah.
And we need to still increase. Obviously, also we now have a potential new problem that with some countries important countries going backwards on their deployment, which will be reflected in the progress we make by 2030. And also, I mean, I understand that some countries, I mean, I had a very interesting visit to China last year, Qinghai province, where there is some very, very large scale solar PV development. But obviously, it just shows some of the challenges because, the best places sometimes can be where you can deploy stuff quickly as well, can be very far from the load centers, and then you have to build the infrastructure as well. And, you may need your storage additions, which, things like pump storage, you can't always build in a year. So it is still challenging to achieve that tripling target.
Good. There is a comment from the audience that on public climate finance, and I would like to read that to you. It said that support from institutions like the World Bank, ADB, and AIIB must play a critical role in solar financing, especially in developing countries where low credit ratings result in prohibitively high financing cost. So this financial barrier deters the growth of solar energy. I think you referred to that in earlier comments, but do you have any more comment on the role of multilateral development banks?
Yes, I mean, inevitably we need them to play a very active role, and that refers back, yes, to the countries I talked about earlier on, which have this problem of not attracting investment, not attracting companies to come in there. And so some of it is about financing, but I think some of it is also about capacity building for policy development to help. And that's where, I mean, the World Bank and ADB and all those countries do have some very good programs in some countries, helping them to establish that strong policy and regulatory framework. But certainly in terms of financing, this is something we've looked at IRENA for some years, where we have something called the Global Landscape of Renewable Energy Finance, which is a report we bring out every 2 years. So this year we'll be bringing it out later in the year, and we do look at how what role the MDBs are playing, and also what type of finance they're providing. And one of the problems we find is that, yes, it's kind of concessionary often, but still at quite high interest rates. So it then adds to the indebtedness of many countries, whereas there used to be a lot more grants available from these institutions, and they seem to have been massively cut. So for some of the programs, especially, I mean, not just the financing, also, I mean, say the programs around capacity building, around training and things like that. I mean, you do need some grants, certainly. But also, yes, of course, various de-risking mechanisms are really important. And I think there is also a worry that maybe some of these organizations may also now be affected by this political pushback from some countries against renewables, which we wouldn't want to see, because we've only just seen them, making renewables more important in their portfolios. So that needs to continue.
For your response, that's you remind the people that apart from the grant or apart from the loan for the hardware, we need also financing for training, capacity building. So maybe in your position, you wouldn't say it. I can say it. I think the cutting of USAID is certainly one of the big setback in this area. Now, there is a question, besides China, what positive examples can we use to encourage other Asian countries to upscale solar energy in their countries? So apart from China, are there any encouraging examples?
I mean, apart from China, it's not just China. I think I mentioned earlier on that India, Vietnam, Thailand are also quite strong in solar. I'm very pleased to find out that this week, because while IRENA has over 160 member states, there are some notable ones missing, and Vietnam was one of them. But Vietnam has just become what we call a country in accession, so working towards membership. So that's great. And also, of course, let's not forget these countries have also been very important in terms of manufacturing and building the supply chain. But I don't know much of the detail, but I've heard a lot about what's going on in Pakistan, where, despite what I said earlier on about the high costs, I mean, rooftop PV in particular really has taken off. And I guess that it's a kind of combination of the power challenges in the country and the fact that solar PV has become so affordable now. So I think that's a really interesting example, which is being looked at not just from within Asia, but also elsewhere in the world. I hear it mentioned very often. I don't know whether you talked about it at some stage during this conference.
Well, yes, indeed. We did talk about rooftop solar, and we cover various aspects in this 3-day seminar, from policy, financing, technology, and community effort. So it's great to have you as our concluding speaker to share some of the great insights into the present state of play. So I would like to thank Uta, Dr. Uta Collier. You have been with us for this now 3 years, right? So I hope next year you come back again with even more positive messages.
I hope so too.
In conclusion, I would like to sort of, in my way, summarize the key messages that we are facing very difficult challenges. At the same time, we don't have a choice to be pessimistic. We need to respond to the new round of NDC in order to take a critical step to achieving the Paris climate goal of achieving 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. We are now close to 1.5 according to IPCC. So we cannot dismiss the possibility of failing the target, but at the same time, we cannot afford to not fulfilling the target. And it's a shared fate of community or of humanity, governments, private sector, NGOs, academics, communities, all stakeholders have a role to play. So at Carbon Care InnoLab, we are such a small organization in the world stage, but we do not shy away our responsibility to add a voice to the effort to push us forward in climate mitigation, in promoting the use of renewable energy, in fossil fuel phasing out, in addressing the various extreme weather and disasters arising from climate change. So with that, I thank everybody. And once again, thank Uta, and have a good day, evening, and a weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.